Any of you waking up this morning are unaware, there was a huge riots last night in Minneapolis over the guy that was killed. So I was looking at Andy No's Twitter, who covers, like Antifa rioting, all that stuff pretty well. They lit a bunch of stores on fire. So it's just craziness. And I shouldn't be surprised, but of course you got lefties defending this as a justified, rational way to express anger. I mean, this is how ghettos are created, for anyone who doesn't know. The one event that caused the ghettoization of the United States more than any other event was the assassination of Martin Luther King and the associated riots afterwards. So even if you're really, really angry, you shouldn't be rioting and looting and burning shit down. In fact, I was surprised to hear, especially this day and age, Mayor Daley in Chicago, I think he was a big government Democrat, and he gave authority to shoot all rioters or maim them, depending on if they were lighting fires or just looting. So, yeah, we've come a long way. And, I blame the media, in part, and all these idiots on Twitter, who, they're all independent, so they're not part of the media, but for creating this false premise that, the cops are unjustly killing people on a daily basis. And so, this had to be stopped. Yeah, I watched the video. They're on the guy's head. It looks really bad. I'd like to know what happened before, why they had 3 cops restraining him. But if they used unauthorized force and they killed a guy, yeah, they should pay the consequences. And also, don't burn the fucking city down. I think it's pretty reasonable. But, as I've alluded to this week, we live in times where everything's so racist. Any rage coming from minorities is just, you can't disagree, you can't do anything. It's just the way it is. So, but I still was rather surprised to see how people were justifying. If you look at the coverage, we're not just talking about broken windows, where there's plenty of that. We're talking about whole buildings lit on fire, and who knows what else. There was also some lady in this is what I mean about you can't make this shit up, because the news is so much crazier than any movie you could ever watch. There was some lady in a wheelchair, or no, like a scooter, at the Target. Target's really big in Minneapolis, but they have them everywhere. But it's headquartered there. She was trying to stab looters or something. So then you kind of beat up this old lady in a scooter and sprayed her with a fire extinguisher. It's just, if the world ends in 2020, at least we can say it was an entertaining year where all the crazy shit that could go wrong went wrong. But anyway, taken aback by that, but maybe I shouldn't be. I keep getting this question kind of from this guy. It's like King Gaming or something. Let's call him King. He's kind of trying to ask me, like, as it relates to the alt-right, what do you see as legitimate? What do you see as dysfunctional or extreme, etc.? I mean, when I came in to speak with people that were in the alt-right or whatever, I thought it was kind of a safe space to talk about things you couldn't talk about in society, in our modern day PC society. Where did things go wrong? How did they go wrong? What can we do to kind of make things better? And yeah, like some of the problems that we can all agree on. The hyper PC-ness, people rioting, and it's supported by largely by members of our community. These bullshit narratives that you see in the news every day and on social media, the stuff like that, the hyper political correctness, just a safe space to be able to talk about those things, uh, which seem pretty reasonable, and like a pretty cool place to be. But you fast forward a couple of years, and it happened before, but yeah, so the alt-right was kind of hijacked or taken over by Richard Spencer, Mike Enoch, these crazy extremists that just seem more interested in pissing people off and talking about how Hitler was right, and wanting to, instead of trying to defend white people, trying to fight back against these bullshit narratives you see in the news against white people or men or cops or all these other things that are vilified. It's become, everything's due to the Jews, and brown people, or the mud people are the worst, and they're degenerate. But so yeah, what I see and what a lot of people see, it's just become like this grievance culture of saying everything edgy for effect or for attention, or just to get it off your chest, or just to troll. And which is fine. My favorite troll was Milo Yiannopoulos. As gay as he was hilarious. I mean, he kind of fucked himself over in a couple of ways, but he was pretty goddamn funny. But he's like nothing compared to Enoch and Stryker, and these people just have these fantastical visions of finding common cause with the Iranians, the Palestinians, and Dukenism or whatever. They want to dismantle the Holocaust and BTFO Israel, and wage this weird jihad. I don't know. But most people that got into those circles or that discussion, I think they wanted to have real conversations about real issues that they couldn't have in other places. And, they weren't necessarily signing up for the Nazi LARPing and the Hitler was right. So, that's what I mean when I'm talking about the extremism and the unhealthiness and the ridiculousness. Well, you got young people watching this. I think the guy that said this is in college, but you're still a lot more developed than someone who's in high school that's going to come across some of this bullshit material. So, that's kind of my main criticism of the alt-right. It's become this ridiculous LARPing and troll fest. Just some of the issues they bring up, which less extreme, but they're big into classical architecture. I like classical architecture. You go to Washington, D.C., the buildings, other places. But it's like they take this idea and they build it into this type of crazy fetish. We need to go back to our traditional ways, and we need all buildings to be traditional and classical. It's like, yeah, I mean, I think we should have some of that. There's some ugly-ass modern architecture. The biggest notable example in my life is the Boston City Hall. Boston has access to the best minds on planet Earth. It's a really great city, despite the horrible sports teams. It's a really great city. And they build this ugly monstrosity of a city hall, which is apparently architecturally it's quite an accomplishment. But that doesn't make up for the fact that it's ugly as hell. I think you could have a movie villain living in the Boston City Hall. in one of these fantasy movies, and it would be the perfect place. But again, I would like to see, yeah, some kind of classical architecture. But it's like they take an idea and turn it into this kind of weird fetish where they think it's gonna, help their soul to have all these classical, traditional buildings. And I don't know, if you get around too much of that classical architecture, if you ever go to like a cemetery with all the mausoleums, all the gaudy mausoleums, it kind of becomes a little bit too much, So it's kind of a good idea that they sort of pervert and make it into this weird fetish. So there's some of that. Yeah, that's not as bad as the Nazi LARPing. Like it's Bronze Age pervert is all about the physical form of the body, lifting and whatever, being jacked, being in shape, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that either. But that guy's turned that into some weird fetish where your value is determined on, how you would place in a bodybuilding competition. So that's what I see with the alt-right. It's become this escapism, this LARPing, this unhealthy worldview where just because it was supposed to be a place where you could come and express ideas that are deemed unacceptable by our modern PC culture doesn't mean you should come in and throw away like every piece of decency and values that we have in modern day society. I talked about the rioting and looting. I think it's a good analogy to what the alt-right is. It's a bunch of people that are pissed off, maybe for legitimate reasons. They want to burn everything down and supposedly build something better. But it's like, you're going to burn down Target, and you've never taken a carpentry class. So what are you going to build in its place? You know what I mean? So, and instead of taking small steps, as I was saying, like, the United States is a large country. It's 13 colonies originally, which could have very well been 13 countries. Many different ethnic groups, religious groups. Many people had the freedom to establish their own isolated groups, You have the Amish, you have the Hasids in New York, you have the Mormons. So, I mean, how many people does it take to create a community? I think back in the day, a few families in a town would found a town. That would be the beginning of a town, And okay, yeah, you're still subject to the United States government and regulations, but you have a lot of autonomy in a little community like that. So it's just practical things like that could be done. No, things like that aren't done. We're just going to have grand visions of new world orders, like a Nazi-esque new world order based on race and religion and being based, and just all this mumbo jumbo bullshit that becomes ridiculous. So when I criticize the alt-right for being unreasonable, I mean, there's so many ways. I've mentioned broadly with a couple of specific examples. Yeah, so it's been poisoned pretty much by idiots and the slippery slope of extremism. So when you think of the alt-right, who are its quote leaders, and I wouldn't even call these people leaders, but for lack of a better word, it's like Enoch, Stryker, Keith Woods now, who's going to be TFO Israel, because the PLO, BDS, Egypt back in the day, they couldn't destroy Israel, but Keith Woods, he's going to lead the jihad against Israel, and that's going to help Europeans a lot. Yeah, Richard Spencer, who's continuing his clownish ways, and that's what the alt-right has become. It's like a glorified glorified mental masturbating while not actually doing anything. If anything, being counterproductive and pissing people off, making enemies, etc. Yeah, I think it sums it up pretty good. I could come up with more examples, but it kind of summarizes it as good as possible. But anyway, yeah, be safe out there. Don't get beat up by rioters, and don't be a tough guy. If people are rioting, just run away. Don't be a tough guy like these rednecks in Georgia that shot this guy. I'll do a separate video on that, my thoughts on that, because I've rambled enough here. But anyway, have a good day.